How's it going, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Liberty After Dark. I am Christian, back at you again with another YouTube video. This time we're going to be focusing on a single topic that I brought up in the last video that we did, the 5 things I wish I knew about philosophy. This was by a viewer request. We're going to be talking specifically about Hume's law, and more importantly, perhaps, what it means for morality and ethics as a whole. Now, I think it's important to start this kind of how we did in the last video, by pointing out that we're going to be following the law of identity, contradiction, and the exclusive middle all throughout this entire thing. If you don't follow any of those for whatever reason, none of this is going to make sense to you, and nothing I say will convince you anyways, because logic doesn't work. So, and also on top of that, I think it's important to note that we're going to work on the premise that reality is real during all of this. It may seem silly now, but we're going to talk a little bit about epistemology at the end of this, just to kind of address some common concerns that people have, but it matters particularly if you already are someone that believes reality is real. Another important thing to note is that the overwhelming majority of this is coming out of Book 3 of Hume's Treatise of Human Nature. So I would highly encourage, if you have any questions after this, you can leave them in the comments. But if you want to go directly to the source, that's the perfect place to do it, since he's the guy who literally came up with it. But let's start, okay? Hume's law, fundamentally, is that you cannot get an ought from an is. Now, what does that mean? An is a fact about reality. Any fact about reality. Let's say my mouse is black, right? That's a fact about reality. We can observe that. We can capture the wavelengths that come off of it. We can all agree that this means black. We've checked all of the boxes. Black is black. My mouse is black. Congratulations. Now, if I was to try to make some moral claim based off of this, say my mouse is black, therefore all mice should be black, or you should only own mice that are black. Other than being an obvious leap in this case, is flawed on multiple levels, and Hume's law being one of them. Now, perhaps a more practical answer is due, and if you missed the last video, I brought this one up in that case. But let's look at a fact of reality, right? Cigarettes cause lung cancer. Very, very well-documented, studied position. I don't think anybody here is going to debate the fact that cigarettes have been shown to be the leading cause of lung cancer, right? Whether there's 100% direct causation or not, let's just say that. They're the leading cause of lung cancer. So a common claim is that people shouldn't smoke cigarettes because cigarettes have a higher chance of causing lung cancer. They greatly increase your chance of causing lung cancer. Now, this seems super sensible. In fact, it is really sensible if and only if you don't want lung cancer. Now, if we look at the tree, the logical tree of this, right, which in this case is really just a logical stick, you have your is on one side, which is cigarettes have an increased chance of causing lung cancer, right? And you have your ought on the other side. Therefore, we shouldn't smoke cigarettes, with a little arrow going in between these two things. Now, the reason that this doesn't follow is, again, because there's something in the middle there, right? Or perhaps even further back from the conclusion, and that this only applies if you don't want lung cancer, right? There's no reason to not smoke cigarettes if you want lung cancer. So this shows it's not as simple as just drawing an is to an ought, right? So basically what this is saying is that before all of this is made, I don't want lung cancer is the original claim, and the ought, that's a value claim. It's another name for an ought. It's a value claim. I don't want lung cancer. Chocolate is the best flavor of ice cream to me, stuff like that. These are all subjective value claims that underpin all of these arguments if you boil it down far enough. Now, in this case, again, we have an ought to an is to an ought, which isn't in itself invalid. All that it is showing is that you cannot underpin this argument as some fact of reality because it's got an is somewhere in it. Lots of arguments have ises. Lots of arguments have facts about reality inside of them, and a lot of them are perfectly fine. Let's say it is cloudy, there is water falling from the sky, therefore it is raining. It's a very reasonable conclusion to make. You could argue you need more details, but I don't think we have to go that far for this example. And once you've drawn that, you see that there's, in this tree, it's an is, comma, is, then you have your is. It's all just one big is statement. Or if you have an ought ending in an ought, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a subjective to subjective, or an objective to an objective in the case of the is to an is, right? So this is a lot of usage of ises and oughts, and it all sounds kind of confusing, but let's look at this from another perspective. One more. Let's say you got yourself a brand new cherry red Corvette, right? C8, fresh off the lot. The thing is smoking. It moves, right? What are you going to do? You're going to speed. You're driving down the highway, 80, 90, maybe even going over 100. You're really cruising it, right? Blowing past people, not a care in the world. Finally, you see those red and blue lights flash up behind you. You pull over because you feel like that's the most sensible thing to do. And you get stopped by the cop, and he comes out and he says, "Hey, did you know you were speeding?" And you ask him something, "Well, I just got a new Corvette. What's up?" I wasn't, just speeding. Yeah, it's what you do. You don't even try to deny it. And he says, "Well, you shouldn't speed because speeding increases the likelihood of getting into a wreck." Now, what do we have here? We have an is forming an ought. The statement is, speeding causes an increased number of car wrecks, or makes you more likely to have an increased number of car wrecks, which I don't think is very hard to believe. And then you have the ought, therefore you shouldn't speed. But somewhere in between there, they're making the value judgment that if you don't want to crash, it's a personal subjective preference. If you don't want to crash, speeding increases the likelihood of crashing, so you shouldn't speed. Now, what does this mean? This means it's not an objective moral or ethic that speeding is bad, just because it can cause an increased number of wrecks. A lot of people would say that this is a very radical claim, but again, if you look, there's always that value underpinning the is in this statement. You can't separate yourself from it. Any argument that you try to dissect that starts with what looks like a factual claim always comes back to an ought. One more example, just really quick. If you like Kant makes the claim that rationality is the most important part of being a human being. It's our fundamental human characteristic, so therefore it ought to be preserved, right? That seems like a logical is to an ought, like it's the thing that makes us the most human. But he chose that over any other of the possible qualities that we as humans share. It could be our DNA. It could be our anatomical structure. He chose rationality as the most specific one. You can make a lot of arguments on whether or not that's more valid than some of the other claims, but it all comes back down to the end of the day that there was a value claim put onto that being the most important thing, which is why it kind of gets rid of the idea of the categorical imperative being an objective morality. Now, I know what you're thinking. If nothing can be tied to any sort of objective fact about reality, like say, my mouse is black, or cigarettes causing higher risks of lung cancer, or speeding, increasing the risk of you crashing your car, then doesn't that mean that all morality is inherently subjective? And yes, that's fundamentally what it means. If you cannot tie any moral claim to a fact about reality, it all comes down to the individual's whims. And that's the struggle, right? That's why nobody has solved ethics. If ethics was some consistent part of the universe that existed objectively, then there would be no discussion. We could just identify it like we do in science. There is no discussion as to whether this rock is granite or this rock is limestone. We can just identify it, look at it, and be able to tell. So let's say granite is morally bad in the universe because of some inherent badness particle that's a part of it. We could identify that and make a claim, not a value claim, but an actual fact-based objective claim that because the badness particle is present, because the badness particle is inherently bad, it's bad. We shouldn't use it on anything. But we can't do that, especially not with the way we live our lives or the entire field of ethics. So yes, if you believe in an objective morality, you have to reject Hume's law. You have to reject the idea that there is no inherent value claim and that you can find a baseline ethic that is without any value claims baked into it that you can derive your ought from. Now, as far as we've known for thousands of years, this has not been possible. We've dissected arguments for basically as long as humans exist, and they all seem to fail Hume's law, even though, he was just a few hundred years ago. But I think it's important to keep in mind that this is not convincing for a lot of people. It may not even be convincing for you, because how much we typically as people like to hold on to this idea of an objective morality. Because if morality is subjective, anything goes, right? If morality is subjective, how can you defend your property? How can you defend your life? If everybody is okay in doing whatever they want, then, you know, it's fair game, right? Well, we'll have to save that for the topic of another video, but definitely something to think on for now. Now, I wanted to take a few minutes, if that, to address some common concerns I get from people who are, let's just say, skeptical when it comes to epistemology, right? A lot of them, it's a common term, is that they appeal to the epistemological unknowable. And I just wanted to underpin the fact that whether or not reality is real at all, it doesn't matter in terms of Hume's law. If you can't get an objective is to begin with, there is no reason to have to dismiss the claim as being an objective ought, because there is no objective is, right? If all of reality is unknowable and we can never know anything for certain, it's no different than someone trying to base a moral claim on an incorrect fact. Like, let's say cigarettes prevent lung cancer. Not even reduce, prevent it entirely. Therefore, we all ought to smoke cigarettes. Well, that's invalid for a completely different reason, but it doesn't change the fact that the argument is invalid. And fundamentally, the conclusion is unsound as well. So it's sort of a moot point, I guess, is the best way to put it. It doesn't matter if reality is real. Hume's law lives regardless. If there is no, you know, if the appeal to the epistemological unknowable is like the most true way to go about doing ethics, then Hume's law still applies, because you still can't get an ought from an is, because there is no is at all. It doesn't exist in this world. Again, I don't think this is necessarily a super common claim, but it's something I hear often, particularly from people who are far leaning subjectivists, moral subjectivists, or ethical subjectivists. They like to lean onto this idea, but, well, can we know anything? And I think one more important thing to address on that is that you have to remember that you are not compelled to follow anything that hasn't been proven or shown or demonstrated, or at least be convincing. There's no obligation for you, just because if someone says, well, you know, what if nothing exists at all, so we can just do anything? There's no obligation for you to then go and do anything if you want to choose to do otherwise. So it's sort of, again, it's another moot point. It still ends up in the same moral subjectivism. It doesn't really change anything. Whether reality is real or not, it doesn't matter. If Hume's law is true, morality is subjective, and we're just fighting over epistemological semantics, I guess. Now, hopefully this video did a lot better job of explaining it than just giving that one particular example, and I hope you guys will be able to look at arguments in the future with this knowledge and be able to dissect them with the lens of Hume and really comb through them like a modern Socrates, tearing down all of these arguments that people build. You'll find it is extremely common in politics. Gun control, perfect example off the top of my head. Guns killed 50 billion people, whatever, make up your number. It doesn't matter how big it is, because at the end of the day, they ought to claim that therefore we should get rid of guns or limit the number of guns that people have, or whatever it is. Tie your shoes on Tuesday. It cannot be based solely on that. There's an inherent value claim somewhere in there that isn't supported by an is fact. It is assumed. In this case, it would be something like, we have to preserve human life at all costs, or that the ability to preserve human life is more important than property rights. These are value claims. They're entirely subjective. There's nothing about that claim that is in itself true or some fundamental part of the universe. So I realize I just kind of circled back into another Hume's law example. Maybe this all makes sense. Hopefully I showed you why it's so important, but other than that, I think that's all that I have. If you guys have any recommendations for future videos on any other topics that you'd like to see, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. And I know everybody says it, but don't forget to like and subscribe for future videos. I plan on doing a lot more stuff like this coming down the road. So if you like these style of videos, go ahead, like I said, like, subscribe, hit the little bell, stay in touch, and I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.